Today I'm going to be talking about stretching quantification, a self-experimentation study, and it's a study about stress relaxation in the human hamstring and gluteus muscles. And my name is Larry Casha. I'm an interventional radiologist, and the reason that's pertinent is my job requires me to wear about 40 pounds of lead every day. And I'm going to let you in on a little bit of my past medical history. In 1990, I was involved in a high-speed bicycle accident. Basically had a large herniated disc at L4-5. And for about 8 years I did a lot of conservative therapy. And in 1998 I woke up one morning and basically lost motor function in my right lower leg. So this became a major issue for me. I then had a discectomy which returned the function. I had some residual numbness on my foot. Then did another 10 years of what you would define as conservative therapy. And symptoms returned in about 1998. The lead didn't help. And basically the conservative therapy that I was involved in was basically from 1990 to 1998, lots of nonsteroidals, muscle relaxants, bed rest periodically. For the chronic pain, more nonsteroidals, occasionally some tricyclic antidepressants, and then physical therapy. And the mainstay of the physical therapy was core strengthening exercises. And so from 2008 to present, that really didn't change that much. Again, nonsteroidals for the pain and spasm, muscle relaxants, bed rest. Then there were a few facet injections here and there, and that kind of helped slightly. Then once again, for the chronic pain, they now have neurostimulators, which I never got involved in, but the physical therapy basically was basically a mainstay to most of this, and was very consistent, and I did a lot of it. And basically the core strengthening, I got to the point where I didn't think I could do any more of it. Then I got very insightful in the concept of stretching, and I had what you might call a stretching revelation. I happened to notice that during the prodromal periods, I would start to feel tightness. And it's very similar to what you feel when you've exercised, this basically post-exercise soreness. So basically, this appeared to precede the other symptoms. And I realized that basically passive muscle stretching by the physical therapist seemed to make a big difference. And the symptoms basically helped with decreased stiffness, helped with the pain and spasm, helped eliminate a lot of the drug dependence on nonsteroidals, the muscle relaxants, and so forth. And I noticed that there were also physiologic improvements from stretching. It's a form of exercise. There were strength and movement gains as opposed to atrophy that typically happens when you have a lot of pain. There was also a feeling of well-being, and that's secondary to hormone release. And this is all well documented in the literature. There's nothing new about any of this. There was also neurologic improvements. I then got involved in basically multiple different methods of self-stretching, and I found it very, very difficult. The methodology was very unclear. It was always kind of painful. I was always stretching to the point where I had to have at least some degree of pain when it occurred, where I didn't feel like I was doing anything. It was typically uncomfortable. The more I read of the literature, the more confused I was. Every study had a different take on it, and so forth. And it felt very time-consuming. It was taking away from these core exercises that I had to do all the time. And there was no direct feedback. And what I did realize when I did see my physical therapist and he stretched me, he gave me feedback. And that feedback was in the form of what's called passive muscle tension. And essentially, he was measuring the resistance to passively stretching me. And they have what they call a modified Ashworth scale that basically scales. And it's a 1 to 5 scale. And it's been well documented in the literature that this is a very subjective assessment. And a lot of them don't use it anymore. And we'll talk a little bit about why. So essentially, what the goals are is something called stress relaxation. When your physical therapist stretches you, he feels this relaxation that occurs, and that means you're doing well, okay? So essentially, we set out to quantify this. So we invented a device. We called it Ajjolos. Okay? And using simple mechanical principles to mimic the effects of being basically passively stretched by a physical therapist, we basically put in a state-of-the-art force plate that measured muscle passive tension to 1/1000th of a pound. And that's an example of the device. So, having this brand new device and no study to use it with, I basically engaged myself and my entire family to get involved in a self-experimentation study. So we had a null hypothesis that stretching on a daily basis would not result in any measurable differences in passive muscle tension over a 9-week period. And each member of the family performed 3 repeated but alternating static straight leg raises at approximately 70 degrees. And this occurred over a 9-week period. Subject A, we had 4 subjects, was a 20-year-old female, 5'6". She was a competitive swimmer. She had been swimming 2 hours a day prior to and during the study. She ran 3 miles a day. She had a moderate scoliosis, and she sustained the mild tendinitis of her left hip during the study. It only lasted for a week, and her pre-study degree of stiffness was low. Subject B was an 18-year-old female, 5'4", also a competitive swimmer, was swimming about 1 to 2 hours a day prior to and during the study. No pre-study musculoskeletal conditions, but she sustained a slight injury to both knees, which impacted her daily activity, and her pre-study stiffness was low. Subject C was my wife, and she was 5'5", and she was running 3 miles a day prior to the stretching. She had a Baker's cyst in her left leg and had diagnosed sciatic nerve problems in her right leg. And during the study, she unfortunately sustained a complete tear of a flexor tendon on one of her toes, which had to basically stop her running, but did not stop the stretching. We maintained that. And she resumed it. It was basically about 2 or 3 weeks that she stopped. And her pre-degree of stiffness was very high, which was interesting. Then subject D was me, 51-year-old. I was riding my bicycle about 30 to 40 miles, 2 to 3 times a week. You know my herniated disc history. And during the course of the study, I really didn't have any pain or symptoms from it. And my pre-degree of stiffness was low. So the Ajjolos would record the passive muscle tension every 2 seconds for 60 seconds. The data was then downloaded into an Excel spreadsheet, and that data was then analyzed with a program called DataDesk. The statistical analysis was conducted for each of the 6 stretches individually engaged in daily throughout the study. And the regression lines calculated were based on a stretch conducted over 60 seconds versus the force in pounds measured by the force plate. Understanding the slope of the stress relaxation curves was very important to the study. And we realized that the smoothness of the stress relaxation curve was also instrumental. So the percentage of the data fitting with the calculated regression enabled us to understand the smoothness of the curves. And here was an example of one of the typical regression analysis studies. And subject A, who actually wrote this, we wrote a paper, had on July 24th, her R squared adjusted, as you see in the top left-hand corner there. I can use my little laser pointer, was about 97%, which is a very smooth curve. Okay. The other interesting aspect was basically the coefficient of time, this number here. And this refers to the instantaneous rate of change. And you can see how small it is. It's minus 0.005 pounds. And that's basically the subjective measurement that your physical therapist is assessing when he stretches you. And that's why it's so subjective and it's so difficult to have that degree of sensitivity. So our data clearly demonstrated consistent trending towards negative sloping regression curves in all of the 4 subjects. And this improved throughout the duration of the study. This was statistically significant for each of the subjects. We didn't always have downsloping or stress relaxation. In the beginning of the study, each individual at various times had what we saw was stress accentuation. In other words, the force increased with time and didn't basically come down and slope down nicely, but they became less frequent as we stretched on a regular basis. In the final weeks of the study, all 4 subjects demonstrated a best fit with regard to the regression lines of 80% or higher in each of the 3 stretches of the legs. And this is an example. This was our ideal line that basically was a very nice smooth curve. And you can see, like here in this blue line, there was this rapid drop off. And then there were areas here where there was a mild amount of accentuation that occurred. And these were common. And as we stretched, not only did we notice that basically the curves got smoother, but the overall force generated was higher. Okay? So our conclusion, this preliminary study suggests that passive muscle tension has a potential for quantifying improvements in stress relaxation affected by regular stretching. Now the limitations, of course, the N was very small. We only had 4 people. A 20 or greater study would be great. The time of day also varied significantly to work around people's schedules, which led us to speculate a little bit. What's the advantage of having a smooth stress relaxation curve? And there is a well-documented musculoskeletal neurologic feedback loop. And having a smoother, cleaner feedback loop would potentially improve coordination and fine motor skills. Now I found one paper that talked about that, and it wasn't a very good paper, actually. So it could be studied further to see if there are improvements in fine motor skills and improved coordination. There was also, what's been out in the literature quite a bit is to compare our musculoskeletal system to viscoelastic structures. And we had difficulty with this because basically viscoelastic structures, which most people realize, have some degree of creep in them when they're stressed. Okay, if you take a piece of aluminum or a piece of rubber, you stretch it enough times, it starts to lose some of its elasticity. We did not find this with regular stretching. Actually, we found that the elasticity was increasing with time, which makes a lot of sense because this is basically a remodeling system that repairs itself and makes modifications as you go along.
Can you explain a little bit more for the music major in the room what you meant by the term regression, how you were using that in here?
Well, that would take a little bit, but basically we're looking to see basically how it varied. We had basically took a bunch of the curves and we found basically the smoothest fit, and then we used that curve to basically compare the other curves. And as the curves got smoother and smoother, we would then go back and then recompare everything and do the regression analysis of it. So we grabbed the smoothest curve and then compared the other curves to it. And the closer they were, the closer we got to 100%, and that's how basically the analysis. So it was always a kind of a back. As we got better and better at it, we then went back and re-looked at the data.
I've been going through a process of structural integration, which uses fascial stretches. And there's different kinds of stretching that you can do. You can isolate a muscle, but you can also work with the muscle trains, which probably improve the stretching and the outcome. I'm wondering if you've thought about doing anything like that.
Well, we have a couple of studies that are ongoing, and we actually we ran a study at the Quinnipiac University. We looked to see if there was any EMG activity with this, because the philosophy of the physical therapists is they think that when they feel that relaxation, they think that you're relaxing the muscles. Your EMG activity is decreased. And our studies show that there was no EMG activity throughout these basic passive stretches. We also did a study with the Lowell Police Academy at the UMass Lowell, and we have some data there with that. But we're starting to look at it actually more as a spring damping system. And we're starting to model it first to see if there's damping characteristics, being underdamped, overdamped, or critically damped. And that might, explain why there was smoothing, that the system would prefer to be critically damped, as opposed to be underdamped or overdamped, although there might be advantages to being in one of those damping characteristics if you're an athlete, But we have not specifically done a study that isolates the muscle like that. I mean, I know there's MR elasticity studies, and they basically pass an ultrasound stress wave through there and then analyze the muscle. And there's a lot of studies like that to look at the stiffness. It would be interesting to do something like that, and we're hoping to continue our research. Well, thank you.